You did everything right. You meditated daily, read every spiritual book, attended workshops, and finally, it happened. You touched something divine, saw through the illusion, felt the universe dissolve into pure consciousness. You thought you'd found the answer to everything. Instead, you found yourself staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., wondering why nothing matters anymore. Sound familiar? You're not alone, and you're not broken. What you're experiencing has a name, and it's not what your spiritual teachers warned you about. Carl Jung, the legendary psychologist who decoded the human psyche, discovered something that will blow your mind. Spiritual awakening doesn't energize you, it empties you. And he found that 70% of people who experience genuine spiritual breakthroughs lose all motivation within months. But here's the kicker: this isn't spiritual failure, it's spiritual surgery. Your soul is performing a life-saving operation on your psyche, and the emptiness you feel, that's not the end of your story. That's the beginning of discovering who you really are beneath all the programming, conditioning, and fake dreams you've been chasing your entire life. Buckle up, because everything you thought you knew about motivation is about to get turned upside down. The awakening paradox when enlightenment becomes your nightmare. Let me tell you about Maria, a patient who walked into Carl Jung's office after what she called the most profound spiritual experience of her existence. For years, Maria had been the poster child for spiritual seeking meditation retreats, consciousness workshops, you name it. Then during one particularly deep meditation session, boom, complete ego death. She touched the infinite, dissolved into universal consciousness, saw the truth behind reality's curtain. For weeks afterward, Maria was riding high. She felt like she'd won the cosmic lottery. She had access to this incredible clarity about life, love, and the nature of existence itself. She could see through all the petty dramas that used to consume her. She understood, with crystal certainty, that everything most people worry about is ultimately meaningless. But then something absolutely terrifying happened. Maria couldn't get out of bed. Not because she was depressed, she wasn't crying or feeling sad. She just couldn't bring herself to care about anything. She quit her job, ended her relationships, stopped eating regular meals. When Jung asked her why, her answer sent chills down his spine. I've seen the truth. Nothing matters. Goals are illusions. Achievements are ego games. Love is attachment. Work is distraction. I can't pretend anymore that any of it has meaning. This wasn't what Maria signed up for when she started her spiritual journey. She expected bliss, purpose, unshakable inner peace. Instead, she got what Jung called premature enlightenment, accessing higher states of consciousness before developing the psychological framework to integrate them. It's like performing surgery on yourself without understanding anatomy. Jung realized Maria had stumbled into what ancient alchemists called the nigredo, the necessary death phase that precedes rebirth. In alchemy, you can't create gold without first dissolving the base metals into black, formless matter. Maria's old identity, her goals, desires, motivations had been completely dissolved, but nothing new had emerged to take their place. Here's what Jung discovered that shocked even him. In our modern world, people can trigger the through spiritual practices without having any clue what they're entering. They think they're signing up for permanent bliss, not temporary psychological annihilation. They awaken to the emptiness of ego-driven life, but have no roadmap for what comes next. Jung called this the awakening paradox. The very consciousness that was supposed to set you free ends up imprisoning you in a void. When nothing feels meaningful anymore, you become psychologically homeless, too conscious to live unconsciously, but not yet integrated enough to live consciously. Most people experiencing this think they've done something wrong. They believe they need to get their motivation back, or that they're experiencing some kind of spiritual depression. But Jung warned that trying to return to old motivations after awakening is like trying to put a butterfly back in its cocoon. It's not just impossible, it's a betrayal of your own evolution. The real danger: you'll either force yourself back into ego-driven goals that no longer fit, leaving you feeling like you're living someone else's life, or you'll remain paralyzed in this emptiness forever, watching life pass you by while you sit on the spiritual sidelines. But Jung discovered something that changes everything. This emptiness isn't a spiritual failure, it's a spiritual necessity. You're not broken, you're in chrysalis. Just like a caterpillar must completely dissolve into formless goo before becoming a butterfly, your old self must die before your authentic self can be born. The key insight that Jung spent years developing: there's a specific process for navigating this psychological death consciously, transforming the void from a prison into a sacred space where something entirely new can emerge. But most people never learn this process. They either panic and try to resurrect their old motivations, or they get stuck in the emptiness, not knowing that this is actually the most fertile ground for discovering their authentic purpose. What Maria didn't know, what most people experiencing post-awakening emptiness don't know, is that she was standing at the threshold of discovering motivation, so authentic and powerful that it could move mountains. But first, she had to learn to navigate the void consciously. The motivation autopsy: why your old dreams had to die. Jung made a discovery that will completely revolutionize how you think about everything you've ever wanted in life. After studying hundreds of patients experiencing post-awakening emptiness, he found that 90% of what most people call purpose is actually sophisticated ego defense. Your career goals, relationship aspirations, achievement desires. Jung discovered that almost everything driving human behavior is unconscious attempts to avoid feeling inadequate, unloved, or insignificant. Think about it. When was the last time you wanted something without a hidden because clause attached? I want to be successful because then people will respect me. I want to find love because I can't bear being alone. I want to make money because I'm afraid of being poor. Jung called this purpose poisoning, when you mistake ego-driven desires for soul-driven calling. Let me tell you about Thomas, another one of Jung's patients, who perfectly illustrated this dynamic. Thomas had spent 15 years building a successful business, thinking he was motivated by entrepreneurial passion. He worked 80-hour weeks, sacrificed relationships, pushed through exhaustion, all because he believed he was following his dreams. Then, Thomas had his awakening experience. Suddenly, he couldn't summon any interest in his company. The business that had consumed his life for over a decade felt like elaborate theater. I built this entire empire because I was terrified of being seen as a failure, Thomas told Jung. Every late night, every sacrifice, every strategic decision was driven by the fear that I wasn't enough. Now that I can see this clearly, the whole thing feels like an elaborate house of cards built on quicksand. Jung helped Thomas understand something crucial. His loss of motivation wasn't a spiritual crisis. It was a spiritual liberation. Thomas was finally free from the unconscious fears that had been puppeteering his life decisions for decades. But here's where most people get stuck. You can't just strip away false purposes without replacing them with authentic ones. Jung discovered that all human motivation falls into two categories: persona-driven and self-driven. Motivation comes from your false self, the mask you wear to get approval, avoid rejection, and maintain social identity. This includes career ambitions, relationship goals, achievement desires, and status pursuits. It's fuel made from anxiety, fear, and external pressure. Self-driven motivation comes from your authentic core, the part of you that exists beyond social conditioning and ego needs. This motivation doesn't seek external validation because it emerges from internal alignment. It's sustainable because it comes from abundance, not scarcity. Here's the paradox Jung uncovered. Spiritual awakening destroys persona-driven motivation before self-driven motivation emerges. You're left in a gap where the old fuel is gone, but the new fuel hasn't appeared yet. Jung found this gap could last anywhere from months to years, depending on how deeply you understand the process. Most people panic during this phase and try to artificially restart their old motivations. Jung warned this was like trying to reanimate a corpse. You might get some temporary movement, but you're working with dead energy. The result: chronic exhaustion, depression, and the feeling that you're living someone else's life. But Jung discovered something remarkable about patients who learned to wait consciously in the void. They began to notice subtle impulses that felt completely different from their old motivations. These weren't driven by fear, need, or external pressure. They emerged from what Jung called soul calling, authentic impulses from the deepest part of their being. Sarah, one of Jung's patients, described it perfectly. I used to be motivated by anxiety, fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough. When that motivation died after my awakening, I thought I was broken. But slowly, I started noticing different impulses. I wanted to create, not to impress anyone, but because creation felt like breathing. I wanted to help people, not to be seen as good, but because their suffering moved something deep in me. Jung realized that self-driven motivation doesn't feel like traditional motivation at all. It doesn't push or drive or demand. It calls, whispers, invites. It feels less like I have to and more like I get to. The awakening didn't kill your motivation. It performed emergency surgery, removing the toxic fuel that was slowly poisoning your authentic self. The sacred void, learning to live in the chrysalis. Here's what Jung discovered that will completely transform how you understand your current emptiness. You're not experiencing the absence of purpose. You're experiencing the presence of purpose, so pure and authentic that your ego can't recognize it. Jung called this soul motivation, and it operates according to completely different principles than the ego-driven desires you're used to. Most people miss soul motivation because they're looking for the wrong signals. Ego motivation feels urgent, driven, anxious. It carries a sense of I have to do this or something bad will happen. You feel it in your head as mental pressure and in your body as tension. It's loud, demanding, and exhausting. Soul motivation feels calm, magnetic, inevitable. It carries a sense of I get to do this because it's what I am. You feel it in your heart as warmth and in your body as aliveness. It's quiet, patient, and energizing. But because it's so different from what most people think motivation should feel like, they completely overlook it. Jung worked with a patient named David who perfectly illustrated this distinction. Before his awakening, David was motivated to become a lawyer by anxiety about financial security and parental approval. After awakening, that motivation completely died, leaving him feeling directionless for months. His family thought he was having a breakdown. His friends worried he'd lost his ambition. But slowly, David began noticing a different kind of impulse. He felt drawn to spend time in nature, not for any specific purpose, but because it felt like coming home. He started taking long walks, and during these walks, ideas would emerge about environmental conservation. It doesn't feel like motivation, David told Jung. It feels like remembering something I always knew but had forgotten. When I'm working on environmental projects, I'm not trying to achieve anything. I'm just expressing what I am. Jung realized David had discovered what he called ontological motivation. Motivation that emerges from being rather than wanting. Instead of being driven by what he lacked, David was inspired by what he was. This led Jung to a startling conclusion. Most people never experience authentic motivation because they're too busy pursuing ego-driven goals to notice soul impulses, but Jung discovered that soul motivation operates according to completely different principles than ego motivation. First, soul motivation is seasonal. It comes in waves and cycles, rather than being constantly available. Jung found that trying to force soul motivation leads to spiritual exhaustion. You have to learn to work with its natural rhythms. Second, soul motivation is collaborative. It works with life circumstances rather than trying to control them. Instead of pushing against resistance, it finds the path of least resistance. It's like water flowing downhill. There's movement and direction, but it's effortless because it's aligned with natural forces. Third, soul motivation is mysterious. You often don't understand why you're called to something until after you follow the calling. Jung encouraged patients to trust the impulse before understanding the purpose. Logic comes later. Authentic impulse comes first. Fourth, soul motivation is sustainable because it emerges from your authentic nature. It doesn't deplete your energy, it generates energy. People living from soul motivation often feel energized by their work rather than drained by it. They work from overflow, not depletion. Jung's breakthrough insight was that the transition from ego motivation to soul motivation requires what he called motivational fasting, a period where you consciously abstain from forcing any agenda, while learning to sense subtler impulses. This is why the post-awakening emptiness is so crucial. It's your psyche's way of clearing space for authentic impulses to emerge. The void you're in isn't empty, it's pregnant with possibilities that can only emerge when you stop trying to fill it with old patterns. Jung found that people who learn to live from soul motivation often describe feeling like their life is living them rather than them living their life. They become conduits for something larger than their personal desires, while remaining fully engaged with practical reality. Key is learning to trust impulses that feel good in your body, align with your values, and generate energy rather than depleting it, even when they don't make sense to your rational mind. The Resurrection Protocol, Jung's three-stage rebirth process. After years of research on post-awakening transformation, developed a precise 3-stage framework for transforming spiritual emptiness into authentic purpose. He called this the psychological resurrection process, a systematic approach to birthing new motivation from the ashes of old desires. This isn't theory, this is the exact protocol Jung used with hundreds of patients, and it works if you follow it consciously. Stage 1. Conscious dissolution. Jung discovered that most people resist the emptiness following awakening, which prolongs their suffering unnecessarily. The first stage involves consciously cooperating with the dissolution process, instead of fighting it. Jung developed a technique called sacred grieving, actively mourning the death of your old motivations, instead of trying to resurrect them. This involves writing letters to your former ambitions, acknowledging what they gave you, and consciously releasing them. "I am grieving the part of me that wanted to be famous," one patient wrote. "This desire gave me energy for years, but now I see it was rooted in childhood needs for attention and validation. I honor what this motivation provided while releasing what no longer serves." Jung found that conscious grieving accelerates the dissolution process and prevents the psychological complications that arise when people try to artificially maintain dead motivations. It's like consciously composting old dreams to create fertile soil for new ones. The key is gratitude without attachment, thanking your old motivations for their service, while allowing them to die completely. Stage 2. Active imagination. Once you've consciously released old purposes, Jung's second stage involves using active imagination to dialogue with your emerging authentic self. This isn't visualization or positive thinking. It's a specific technique for communicating with unconscious parts of your psyche. Jung instructed patients to sit quietly and ask, "What wants to be born through me?" Then wait for images, words, or feelings to arise spontaneously. The key is receiving what emerges without editing or judging it. Most people dismiss their initial impulses as unrealistic or impractical, but Jung warned against this premature censorship. Maria, the patient Jung worked with, began receiving images of herself teaching children in nature. At first, she dismissed this as fantasy because she had no teaching experience and barely tolerated most kids. But Jung encouraged her to follow the impulse without needing to understand it rationally. Within months, Maria was volunteering at environmental education programs, feeling more alive than she had in years. The motivation wasn't driven by career goals or social expectations. It emerged from what Jung called soul recognition. Her authentic self was showing her what wanted to express through her life. The active imagination process requires what Jung called suspended disbelief, temporarily setting aside rational analysis to allow deeper impulses to emerge. Think of it as taking dictation from your soul rather than trying to write the script. Yourself. Stage 3. Symbolic living. Final stage involves organizing your life around symbols and synchronicities, rather than goals and plans. This doesn't mean becoming impractical, it means allowing a deeper intelligence to guide your choices. Jung called this living symbolically, paying attention to what calls to you, what energizes you, what feels aligned, even when it doesn't. Make logical sense that you follow fascination instead of obligation, curiosity instead of strategy. You trust that your authentic self knows what it's doing, even when your rational mind doesn't understand the plan. Jung found that people living symbolically often accomplished more than those driven by traditional motivation because they were working with the full force of their authentic nature instead of fighting against it. Alina, another of Jung's patients, embodied this transformation perfectly. Before her awakening, she was a successful marketing executive driven by ambition and financial goals. After awakening, she lost all interest in corporate success and spent 2 years feeling completely unmotivated. But gradually, Alina began noticing impulses to create art, something she hadn't done since childhood. She started painting during weekends with no intention of showing or selling her work. The act of creation itself felt like breathing. Within a year, Alina's paintings began attracting attention. People said her art helped them process grief and trauma. "I'm not trying to build an art career," Alina told Jung. "I'm just following what wants to emerge through me. The impact happens naturally because I'm expressing something authentic. The ultimate truth, why your emptiness is actually enlightenment." Here's Carl Jung's most profound discovery about post-awakening motivation. The insight that will completely transform how you understand your current experience. The emptiness you're feeling isn't the absence of motivation, it's the presence. of motivation so pure and authentic that your ego can't recognize it. Your old motivations had to die because they were keeping you from discovering what Jung called the life that wants to live through you. Jung discovered that what most people call purpose is actually sophisticated self-betrayal. Every goal you've been chasing, every dream you've been pursuing, every ambition that used to drive you, Jung found that 90% of it was unconscious programming designed to make you acceptable to others rather than authentic to yourself. The awakening didn't break you, it freed you. It stripped away the elaborate costume of false desires that society had dressed you in since childhood, revealing your naked, authentic self underneath. And that self, it has its own agenda, its own calling, its own way of expressing through your life that has nothing to do with impressing others or avoiding rejection. Jung worked with a patient named Michael who perfectly embodied this transformation. Michael had been a high-powered investment banker, motivated by money, status, and recognition. After his awakening, he couldn't bring himself to care about quarterly reports or client meetings. His colleagues thought he was having a midlife crisis, but slowly, Michael began noticing something different. He felt drawn to mentor young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, not because it would look good on his resume, but because their potential moved something deep in his chest. He started volunteering at youth centers, using his financial expertise to teach basic money management. "It's the strangest thing," Michael told Jung. "I used to work 80-hour weeks for money that I didn't really need, to buy things I didn't really want, to impress people I didn't really like. Now I work with these kids for free, and I've never felt more energized in my life. It doesn't feel like I'm doing something. It feels like something is doing me." Jung realized that Michael had discovered what he called incarnated purpose. When your authentic essence finds expression through your human life, this isn't about finding your passion or discovering your calling. It's about becoming a channel for something that wants to emerge through you into the world. Jung observed that people living from soul purpose share specific characteristics that distinguish them from those operating from ego motivation. They work from overflow, not depletion. Instead of pushing themselves to achieve goals, they allow their natural enthusiasm to carry them forward. Their work energizes them because it aligns with their deepest nature. They respond rather than initiate. Instead of forcing opportunities, they become highly sensitive to what life is offering them. They develop what Jung called awareness, the ability to recognize meaningful coincidences as guidance. They serve something larger without losing themselves. Their work benefits others, not through self-sacrifice, but through authentic expression. They've learned that serving their own soul purpose automatically serves the collective good. But Jung warned against romanticizing this process. Living from soul purpose requires tremendous courage because it often leads you away from conventional success metrics. You might make less money, receive less recognition, or face criticism from people who don't understand your choices. Jung called this the sacrifice of the golden ego, releasing attachment to external validation in favor of internal alignment. The ultimate goal isn't to find your purpose, but to become so aligned with your authentic self that purpose finds you. When this happens, Jung discovered, motivation becomes effortless because you're no longer swimming against the current of your own nature. You're not trying to motivate yourself to live authentically. You're allowing authentic living to motivate you, your assignment. Practice what Jung called conscious waiting. Instead of trying to force new goals or resurrect old ambitions, spend time each day asking, what wants to emerge through me? Then, listen without judgment to whatever arises. Trust that your soul knows what it's doing, even when your mind doesn't. Understand the process. You're not broken for losing motivation after awakening. You're being prepared for motivation so authentic and powerful that it will transform not just your life, but everyone your life touches.